Hello, my lovelies. Welcome to another video. Today, we'll be talking about magical objects of Middle-earth, the 7 seeing stones, the Palantíri. Well, actually, it were 8, but I'll explain that in my video. They were crafted by no one else than the mightiest elf that ever lived, Fëanor himself. We do not know exactly when they were created. My guess is before he created the Silmarils, because I still do think the Silmarils are the height of his power, and he created the Palantíri before them. We also do not know if there are actually more than the known 8 Palantíri in Aman, but we know of the 8, and I will explain where are the locations they were placed in, what is their magic, what is their power. But before I'll do that, let me give you an explanation, or let me try to explain why they were of such importance to the Legendarium. I hope you enjoy.
Think of them as mobile phones someone had during, let's say, the Dark Ages. Communication, even in Aman at that time, wasn't immediate and easy. Messengers had to travel long distances. Decisions often had to be made without knowing what the other side was planning. Obviously, in a peaceful realm like the Undying Lands, urgent communication probably wasn't as necessary as during war times in Middle-earth. Still, not everyone had eagles at hand as messengers, so Fëanor's invention made sense. There were 3 elven clans and royal houses. They all lived in different capitals around the island, and even during time of peace they probably wanted to stay in touch. Still, I feel Fëanor's invention was made for Middle-earth. The lands were vast and unpopulated. Traveling took days, weeks, even months. The only form if you didn't have a fell beast or Nazgul at hand was horseback or even on foot, or partly on ship. Middle-earth was definitely not at peace. Yes, there were times of peace, but they went hand in hand with countless wars. So having a Palantíri at hand during those times gave the side owning and being able to use one a clear advantage. No wonder Sauron and Saruman's main goals were to get their hands on a Palantíri. More on that a bit later. Let me explain their origins. As I said, we know of 8, 7, and a Master Stone. The Master Stone never left the Undying Lands. It was placed in the Tower of Avalone in Tol Eressëa. We do not know if it did communicate with the stones of Middle-earth. My guess is due to its position, it had another function and different purpose. Maybe it was something like an eye watching over the whole world, things that took place in Middle-earth as well as the Undying Lands. Therefore, it was placed at an island in between the continents. All stones were black at first glance, made out of a dark crystal. They were said to be indestructible, and some speculated only the fire of Orodruin could destroy them. Seems familiar? Did Fëanor maybe made them that way? Obviously not in Mordor, it didn't exist during that time, and therefore it is the only way to destroy them. This seems very similar to how centuries later Sauron created the One Ring, if you ask me, or even how Fëanor's last living descendant Celebrimbor forged the 19 Rings of Power. They varied in size. The largest one was the Master Stone, followed by the Osgiliath Stone, who later became the Master Stone of Middle-earth. Some of the smaller ones were the size of a ball and quite handy as they could be carried to any location by its owner. The stones didn't stay in the Undying Lands, where I find they were a bit useless anyway. We know all 7 went to Númenor in the Second Age of the world as a gift to men. I always wondered how Fëanor and why didn't take them with him when he left the Undying Lands. He knew he would most likely never come back. Why would he leave objects of such importance that could give him an advantage in the wars to come behind? Was he that sure of a quick victory over Morgoth? I think most likely they were scattered all over Aman though, and he didn't have the time to collect them before fleeing. Otherwise, this would probably be a very short video, as they most likely would have been lost during the multiple wars of the First Age, and they would never have reached Númenor or Men. So, what happened? The elves of the Undying Lands, most likely Noldor elves that stayed behind, were still in loose contact with the Númenóreans. In the year 1900, during the rule of the 12th king Tarkiriatan, the shadow did fall on Númenor, the Silmarillion tells us. I do have various theories what that means. I have a video on how Sauron influenced the Númenóreans over centuries before actually being captured, if you're interested. But whatever happened, the takeaway is the Númenóreans cut contact with the elves, banned their language, and later on even forbade them to enter Númenor. The elves, being very concerned, remember, they once had been allies. The Númenórean royal house even had elven blood. Elros, their first king and founder of the royal house, was a half-elf, and they gifted the stones to those Númenóreans that withstood the royal decrees of shunning the elves. We do not know who and how and exactly when this happened, but we know it was Amandil, a descendant of the first king of Númenor, but not from the ruling line, and he was given the 7 seeing stones. Amandil was the 18th and last lord of Andúnie. This was the line of the faithful Númenóreans. He was the father of Elendil, an ancestor of Aragorn. We do not know what happened to the stones during the time of Númenor. Most likely they were hidden by Amandil. What we know is they survived the downfall with Elendil and his few escaping ships of the faithful, and it reached Middle-earth just before Númenor's drowning. Elendil kept 3 of the stones with him in his newfound realm of Arnor, and gifted 4 to his 2 sons Isildur and Anarion, who founded the kingdom of Gondor in the south. But how did the stones actually work? Well, first of all, not all stones were connected and could communicate with each other. Also, the stones did not record or show sounds, so it was not exactly like a mobile phone. But if the user was strong enough, you could communicate, most likely through a form of telepathy, I would say. But you could see the surroundings of the place the other stone was set in. I don't know how much that would benefit the owners, though. I think the telepathy aspect was the more advantage aspect of the stone. But this limits the possibilities of usage. As I told you, only the strongest being could communicate this way and use the power of the Palantíri. The stones also needed to be placed correctly to use them. They had a top on the bottom and needed to be placed in the correct cardinal points according to the stone you wanted to communicate with. So I guess each stone was given a specific placement to communicate with a specific stone, and most likely they were not moved around a lot. Let's take a look at the map and the locations of the stones at the end of the Second Age. Let's start in Gondor. The Osgiliath stone, the new master stone of Middle-earth and the largest and probably most powerful one, was placed in a chamber called the Dome of Stars. Only the kings themselves were allowed and actually able to master and use the stone. Sadly, it was the first to be lost. During the reign of the 21st king of Gondor, Eldakar, a civil war started. The city of Osgiliath was besieged and burned, and the stone was lost in the waters of the river Anduin. The so-called Ithil stone was placed in Minas Ithil by the Gondorian king Isildur, who founded the city. This was the stone that Sauron would use in the Third Age. There was a reason he sent the Witch King in the year 2002 of the Third Age to besiege Minas Ithil. Sauron wanted the stone and the power it would give him. The stone was taken to Barad-dûr, and Minas Ithil became Minas Morgul, the Tower of Dark Sorcery. The third of the Gondorian stones were the Orthanc stone, placed in the great tower Orthanc, guarding the northern borders of Gondor. Just like Sauron had a reason to attack Minas Ithil, the main reason behind Zaruman asking for the tower as his seat was his hope the stone would still be there. Zaruman was a powerful magic user and knew of the power of the Palantíri and knew how to use it to his advantage. And use it he did and sealed his fate by doing so. Slowly, he fell under the power and spell of Sauron, who himself was using the Ithil stone to do so. So, stones that once were helpful objects to communicate with each other and stay in close contact were corrupted and used to bend the will of your opponent. Another example of what the rings or the Silmarils actually did. After it fell in the hands of the Fellowship, Pippin and Aragorn used the stone to deceive the Dark Lord himself. After the War of the Ring, the Orthanc Stone remained in the custody of the kings of Gondor in the Fourth Age. The last of the 4 Gondorian stones was the Arnor Stone, placed at Minas Arnor, later known as Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor. After the fall of the last king of Gondor, the 33rd king Earnor, side note, this is the king that chased the Witch King after defeating him at the Battle of Fornost in the Third Age, and was held back by Glorfindel, who foretold, "Not by the hand of man shall he fall." Shout out to Eowyn, by the way. The king later rode to Minas Morgul to challenge the Witch King, who was hiding there, and he was never seen again. Therefore, the line of Gondorian kings ended, and the Stewards took over. The Arnor Stone was kept a secret by the ruling Stewards, well, until our beloved Steward Denethor II started using it. At first, the stone did help Denethor to overview the war with Sauron and gave him an advantage over the Dark Lord, but just like with Zaruman, Sauron slowly poisoned his mind. Although Sauron never managed to break Denethor's will. You might think what you want of Denethor, but he was a strong and powerful leader, holding his own in a battle of wills against the Dark Lord himself. That was unheard of. Burning himself alive in his final hour of madness, Denethor did hold the stone, and from then on his hands were marked in the stone for everyone to see. Creep alert. The first of the Arnorian stones was the Illestrion Stone, also known as the Elendil Stone, placed by Elendil himself in the Tower of Illestrion, west of the Shire. This stone was unique for 2 reasons. It was not only used by the kings of Arnor, but also by the elves that lived nearby, the elves of Lindon. One of the most famous elves we know of that is said to have used the stone was Círdan himself. The king and the elves did use it to look west, towards the Undying Lands. It is said the king even tried to use the stone to see if anything of Númenor remained. The island was his home, his birthplace. Imagine him trying to locate anything. Maybe he still had some hope left to find remainers. But he never did. And with him and the stone not being able to see, the memories of Númenor faded over time. The elves who took over the stone after the death of the king used it to communicate with the Master Stone that was placed in the Tower of Avalone in the Undying Lands. Important fact, other than communicate with the Master Stone in the west, this stone could not communicate with the other 6 stones of Middle-earth. The stone became somewhat of a relic. Elves did pilgrim to the stone to see the Undying Lands and get a glimpse of the Valar and the bliss of Valinor. What happened to the stone after the fall of Sauron in the Third Age? One of the last ships of the elves leaving Middle-earth took the stone and brought him back to the place it was made. I actually wished it could have stayed in Middle-earth for the remainers, elves as well as men, not to lose touch to the gods and the Undying Lands. The Amunsul stone was placed in the watchtower of Amunsul. It was the largest and most powerful of the Arnorian Palantíri, and the most used stone. Arnor basically connected through this stone with Gondor directly. It was also said to have been one of the heavier ones. The stone was placed by Elendil himself at the time he founded his kingdom. And again, the stone was sought after. Sadly, the kingdom of Arnor began to fall apart and did split up in 3 fractions: Rhudaur, Cardolan, and the remainers of the kingdom of Arnor, Arthedain. Until the year 1409, Third Age, the stone did remain in Amunsul, withstanding Rhudaur and Cardolan trying to get their hands on the powerful object. But Angmar and the Witch King couldn't be stopped forever, especially not by the 3 kingdoms in strife, no longer working together. The tower was burned to the grounds, but Arthedain's last king, Arvedui, managed to save the Watchstone and bring it to the new capital Fornost and keep it safe from the enemy there. After Arthedain finally did fall, Arvedui escaped again with the stones. He also had the Anumina stone at this point in time, more on that one later. He fled north and was given shelter by the Losloth, the ancient people from the northern lands of Middle-earth. A ship, most likely sent by Círdan, I would say, came to rescue Arnor's king. And we're getting another prophecy and another object making a comeback. You remember the Ring of Bara here, right? That was the ring given by Finrod to the House of Beor as a promise to aid this house when in need. Later, the ring was used by Beren to cash in the promise by the Elven Lord, and is from then on an heirloom to the house. So the ring survived the downfall of Númenor and in the end even makes it to Aragorn. It's a symbol of the ancient friendship of men and elves. Arvedui gave the ring to the Losloth out of gratitude, and therefore it survived another tragedy. The Northmen actually warned the king not to board the ships. They knew a tragedy was approaching, but he did not listen, and well, he drowned, and so did the two Palantíri. They were lost forever in the icy waters of the north. The last of the 7 stones was the just mentioned Anúminar stone. It was said to have been one of the smaller stones, and therefore it is no surprise it could easily be saved when the king of Arnor fled his doomed kingdom. Sadly, we do not know a lot more about this stone, but I covered it already in the story of King Arvedui. So, let's recap. 5 of the 7 stones were lost or taken back to the Undying Lands, and only 2 remained in Middle-earth. The stone of Minas Arnor or Minas Tirith and the stone of Orthanc. And even the 2 remaining stones got lost somewhat. They faded out of memory of the people. Only kings and close advisors even knew over time where they were hidden. The kings no longer used the stones, and they were written out of history. They became relics of the past. In a way, it is funny if you think of it. They were a never before seen form of communication, a modern form of communication. Still, they were almost shunned. Was it due to the kings no longer being strong enough to control them? Was mankind afraid of their power after all the Dark Lord and his minions had used the stones to bend the will of good people? Was the time of magic and magic objects over? I think all of it. Also, this proves for me now the age of men fully came. The elves were gone, and why longer use elven objects that were not made for men in the first place? So, most likely all communication with the Undying Lands did stop at this point. There was no stone left to connect the gods with humankind. But maybe the Master Stone of Avalonis still has its eye out for the people of Middle-earth, just in case.